All right, well, thank you everybody for joining. This is our inaugural monthly hub webinar and really excited to kick it off. My name is Ellie Grapp. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the regional training director with the Mountain Midwest Hub, serving states from Idaho all the way over to Wisconsin, Illinois on that eastern edge. And we're very excited to welcome Naawakwe, who will be presenting on engaging with tribal communities for our first webinar, which these webinars, if you're not familiar, are just a way for us to kind of fill in some of the gaps outside of YUSA training system and get some learning and educational opportunities out there to our region. So these are only half an hour, really bite-sized. So I'm gonna get it turned over as quickly as I can and let Naawakwe introduce himself now.
Bonjour, Ginawago. Migege do Japan Shinabe Awayan. Nemenuenda Nayaya Nama Gainin. Dagaganunetiang YMCA. Engaging with tribal communities Kadego. Nina Megasi and do them Papush community gong ma Ingi Tajin Tawag Minawago and Gion Dadisima Papush community gong up at you go in Nizagatun Papush community gong in Dadisian. Nina go tribal liaison nation and Kadego and Dananaki the YMCA. Yeah, so that's that's me. That's who I am, part of who I am, I suppose. And what I said was just because it's on the screen here, it talks about, it says Ojibwe Anishinaabe Awit. And then there's my name, or both a couple of my names there. And so my name's Naawakwe. I'm also known as William House. And I am Ojibwe Anishinaabe. Some people go by Ojibwe, some people go by Anishinaabe, some people even go by Chippewa, but all the same name for a specific tribe, one of the 576 or so tribes in the United States. And I am also very happy to be here so we can have some conversation, some dialogue, share some things about engaging with tribal communities. And also I needed to mention that I'm from the Eagle Clan, and I was born and raised in a place called the Place of the Bald-Headed Island, which is, well, it's where I am right now. And it's where I was born and raised at. And I love this place. It's where I came from and where I come from. So that's what we're going to talk about here today, a bit about how to engage with tribal communities.
Yeah, thanks for that intro, Naawakwe. And just to frame the format for everybody, I'll just be posing some questions for Naawakwe and he'll answer them. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and then we'll try to circle back around at the end to have a little bit of Q&A time. All right, so Naawakwe, could I ask you to share a bit about your role with the YMCA?
Yeah, absolutely. There was a time, seems like a long time ago through the pandemic. It was just before things got shut down and got a bit crazy with the pandemic. And Sarah Cole reached out here and reached out to me, somehow found me. She can tell the story better of how she found me. And I would encourage her to maybe do a webinar at some point on how she finds her resources. But and she asked to meet with me. And during a couple different conversations that we had over coffee and that in a local coffee shop, she asked if I would consider partnering with the Y as in a certain role. And we kind of worked it out and thought maybe that a tribal liaison type title would be one of the better roles. And so since that time, become a partner as the tribal liaison. And some of the work that we kind of centered and have centered the work around the last couple of years is really just trying to make sure that the connections that the YMCAs have in this area in the region are strengthen their connections, and the both, not just connections, but also maybe services or programming with the local tribes in those areas. But not only just with the tribes, but also within what people kind of would probably term Indigenous families and or just Indigenous people. Indigenous meaning another word for American Indian, and which is also another word for Native American, but not specific to any one tribal group. We've done a lot of work locally here with Duluth YMCA, but also other YMCAs within our region here, and also even broader. And this is part of that effort, is to try to ensure that we're doing some supports and playing a role in impacting relationships with local tribes throughout a 12-state region.
Perfect, thank you. So just to dive right in, right, how can a local YMCA start building those connections with local Indigenous tribes and people?
You know, there's no one way to do it. And you're going to hear me talk about local, 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 local. And that's just important because we are oftentimes trained in growing up in this country, and it's no fault to anyone, but it's that there's this idea that all American Indian folks kind of come from the same tribe, or we have the same language, or we have the same value structures and all of these things, the same status. And it's quite unique, actually. So it is really important that we think about local tribes and people who are locally there. And so one of the more important things is to reach out within your own organization and talk to the staff that currently work with the YMCA where you're located at, or within the organizational structure, and also reach out to different community partners and ask about trusted people in the area, trusted people who live in the communities that you serve. If they know anyone, do you know anyone who's from some of the local tribes that are in this area? And you might not be at that point. You might not know who the local tribes are, and we'll get to that later on in the webinar, but it's important to start within and use your resources from within. If no one has any answers to that, and the answer is, we don't really know, then you can expand beyond there. But it's also always important to use your resources from within and start to gather some names of some individuals or organizations that might be able to help you make stronger connections. Like I said, another good strategy is to always reach out to the local tribes. So reaching out to a local tribe and asking about, is there someone who specifically is identified who works for the tribe, who can share resources or serve as a representative to provide us with information on how we can make connections or which programs are available, things like that. So it's really important to reach out to whichever number of local tribes are in the service area that a YMCA serves. Because they may already have people who are identified to do that role for the tribe. That might not exist, though. So another option is to reach out to local, what we might call Indigenous organizations. It's not a tribally specific one, but it kind of serves American Indian Cultural Center or something like that, or an American Indian Community Center. And those organizations might be some good places to make some connections with. They might have individuals or liaisons. The other option is that public schools who serve a certain number of American Indian students as in their student population will be required to, or almost always have, an American Indian education program. And so looking to your local public schools and finding out either from their website or making a connection there, who is the coordinator or who are the staff who work for American Indian education programs. Those folks can serve as resources, but also as ways to really build connections between the tribes and between the people that you would want to serve.
Awesome. So our next question then, what can our local YMCAs do to be more culturally responsive?
Yeah, it's a big question. And there's a lot of different things that people can do, but I think I'll talk a bit about some of the things we've begun to do here locally and that I would encourage other places to do. And one of that is to incorporate local tribal language into your signage. And so language, as we know, can be really important. It's come more and more common to have forms for enrollment and any number of different signage throughout a building in multiple languages. And in other parts of the world, that's actually quite common and is the norm. So one of the things here that we can do to really, even if the use of the language is pretty low, is to recognize that the language that was spoken in that area prior to anything else is really important. And so adding that to the signage throughout a building and things like that can be a way to say, hey, we recognize you and we want to respond to you, and not just by looks or by different things, but also by language. So I'm really a strong advocate for utilizing local tribal languages. You're going to have to find a resource, and that leads to other good work. So that's another reason that I would recommend that. Other things that places YMCA can do are offering culturally specific activities, things that local tribal representatives would be best served to recommend to the staff of a YMCA. I put an example on here as a Ojibwe word, baga dewewen. That means to play lacrosse. So if you don't know, lacrosse is a game that was created here by a number of different tribal groups played lacrosse. Ojibwe people have played lacrosse since as long as we know, and we call it baga dewewen. And so one of the things we're planning currently is designing a lacrosse camp, utilizing the traditional forms of sticks and balls and the gameplay as a way to encourage local folks who might not have as strong of a connection with the YMCA to come out. And so I've been working with Sarah Cole on that. That's a current project that we're working on. So anything like that a local representative might encourage staff of a YMCA to do that is culturally specific, I think is a good way to strengthen connections and show in a responsive way, hey, you're a part of us and we're a part of your community and we're all one community. So the other thing that can be done, and these are a little more common, is for an organization or a Y staff to provide what they might call a culturally responsive workshop. What I would recommend again is bring in folks from the local tribes, have people from the local community be a part of providing what that means. What does it mean to be Ojibwe? I'm from a place it's in French, but in English, I guess they call it Fond du Lac Reservation. We call it Paposhkomenetig, but it's important if you're going to do a workshop or something here about this area to have people who are from here be a part of that, to provide that local knowledge, that local history and local cultural norms and values. So that is another way for staff to sort of increase their understanding of the communities and families that they serve.
Beautiful, thank you. So we talked a little bit about, the importance of connecting with local tribes. So now, right, is down to the nitty gritty. How can Y staff find out who the local tribes are in their service area?
Yeah, so I've listed a few ways here, a few approaches that I would recommend that folks can take. I would say never guess. That's not a bullet on here, but just don't guess. But one thing you do have to do is to understand that when we say local tribes, it really is a local uniqueness to who that tribe is, what their name is, and their language they speak, and the values and all of those things. And so really understanding that, like I said, I think earlier I said 576, I think it's 576, might be 567. That's the number of tribes that are recognized in the United States. And so, and we are all different in some ways. Sometimes we're the same. There's a number of Ojibwe tribes that are recognized. But some tribes are very large and some are quite small. And so it is important to recognize, okay, I'm not looking for this just one generic idea of what an American Indian is, but I'm actually looking for a specific tribal name and location. And so if you're unsure, couple Google searches you can do. If you have a different, if you use Bing or Yahoo or any other kinds of, you don't have to use Google, but to do an internet search, you can search American Indian tribes near me. I've done this. I tested it out before we did the webinar. I'd never done that before in my life, mostly because I've always lived here and I knew the tribes that were near me. but that works. It's a pretty good quality search on Google, I can say that. You can also search American Indian tribes in, and then put your state name, and you get pretty good results there as well. And so that's a couple internet searches that you could use. Just so folks know, this PowerPoint will be shared, so it'll be available for you, everyone to download and have available to them. Another option is I linked a couple directories that you can utilize. And so one goes to an organization called NCAI, and you can search by your state or your area, and it gives you there's a full tribal directory there of all, I would say pretty much almost all of the federally recognized tribes in the United States. There is also another directory from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, from the BIA, that is another directory that leads to tribal leaders and organizations. And there's a number of websites, and you can go directly to a website. You can also search that by state. So those are a couple of good links and to directories that you could utilize as well.
Perfect, thanks. And I dropped those links in the chat for anybody that wants to click over for later as well.
Great, thank you.
Yes, so, right, we've done our Google search. We've identified what tribes are near us. So what then should be done once those tribes or individuals are identified?
As with anything, there's a number of things you can do, but these are some of my recommendations. And this is similar to what Sarah Cole did with me, as well as some other things that I would recommend. And so one of those things, you go through that process, you get some names of some folks, maybe you do a Google search for that about that person, you look them up, you double check their name with somebody else, you found local tribes, you've reached out to them, maybe you got some contact information, maybe you didn't. But once you get some names of some people and some contacts, reach out to them. And I would say reach out to them, ask for a meeting, explicitly sort of express your interest in that, hey, I would like to meet with you because I work with the Y, and we really are committed to increasing our relationship with either with a local tribe or with an organization or just with the broader community in general. And that you specifically want to do some good work with, say the indigenous community, or in this sense, like the Ojibwe community here locally. And because I think being clear about the intent is really important from the beginning, is that, hey, that's what we want to learn, and we want to build a relationship. And we heard that you'd be a good person who can either give us more information about more people we could connect with, or possibly that there might be a person who can actually serve in that capacity. And so that's really important. What I would really recommend is that if you already know, always consider cultural protocols. And we all have these. If I don't know, from what I can tell, I don't know anybody else in this who's logged on here. But if I came to your home, you probably have everyday things, ways of life, that when someone comes to your house, you do certain things. And whether that's how you invite them in, whether that's people take their shoes off, whether all of these different things that are the norm for you, we all have those things. And so what I'm talking about here in regards to cultural protocols is that sometimes when you meet with someone, to ask them for information or just to get to know them, there might be certain cultural protocols in place. And we got to a point, Sarah and I, when we were meeting, and she said, I know enough, I don't know much about Ojibwe cultural protocols, but I know enough that tobacco is important as an offering, and I would like to offer you some. Is that okay? And I said, yeah, absolutely. But it made me feel good. It helped me understand that she was sincere in what she was doing and her intent on developing this relationship and this partnership. And so for me, that was meaningful. Maybe to someone else that wouldn't be, because that's not their cultural norm. So it's not an easy thing to do, but if you do know those things, I would always recommend utilizing those cultural protocols when you know them. And if you're not sure, when you are meeting with somebody, I think a good honest thing to do is to say, are there things in your belief structure or in your cultural way of life that I should do in order to make this relationship meaningful or important? And hopefully they might be somebody who would tell you what those things are, and then you could gain that. So that's a really important part for all of us, no matter, you know, what it might be. We all have cultural protocols, and the more we know, the better we can build relationships with one another. I did say there are some things that leadership should ask themselves, and that brings us right to this.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, I don't really even have to introduce this one.
So we'll just roll into it. I do think there are some important things that YMCA leadership, and I'm not here to define leadership for you. I think that's up to the local organization and structure. But one of the things that we should ask, and leadership should ask ourselves, is, are the local tribal communities represented in our membership? If you're not sure, that's the answer. If you know for sure that they're not, because it's something you might have been working on for a bit, then the answer to the question is no. And we can't be afraid of a no to any of these questions. We can't be afraid to, when we ask ourselves these questions, to say, we really don't know. We've never looked at that. We've never gathered that. We don't have the data to even be able to assess it. We can't be afraid of that. We need to embrace that. But if we don't ask these questions, and probably some other questions as well, then we might have a blind spot in just in who we're serving and the levels of service that we're providing. So that's a good question just to ask leadership to ask themselves. Are they represented in our membership? And if they aren't, what are we doing, or what could we be doing to ensure that the whole community is being served or best served by the YMCA or YMCAs in that area? And so, and that's a big question, and you might not have answers to that. But here's some strategies we can use to try to get some answers to that. So again, make a list of all the possible barriers with leadership teams and with your boards. When you have those folks come together, say, hey, this is an important initiative that we're working on. It's an important a goal area for us. And so let's look at what are the possible reasons that we might not have the representation in our membership that we should, or that we want. And what are the things that we could do, and what are the barriers for us not being able to do that? Again, reach out, connect with your local connections, with the tribes, with organizations, with American Indian education programs, and ask them, what can we do to get a better representation in our membership? What could we do to ensure that the whole community is being served? And not only that, who can we work with? Who are the important people to work with? Because we can't know it all, and we can't do it all. And so sometimes we have to reach out and figure out who else is out there in our area who can help us out with this. And if you find someone, I would recommend that you find somebody and make it a priority to develop a tribal liaison position. It could be a full-time position, it could be a contract position, whatever funding you might have available, or whatever the person who you find is available to provide. And so it might not be that a full-time position or a salaried type position or hourly position is really an option for that person, but they might do it on a contract basis for their time. And so be open to that, but I think it is important, and what we spend our money on shows what we value. Not always, but that is part of programmatic and, institutional structures. So
Definitely. So if you could leave us then with some parting thoughts, please.
Absolutely. Time flies by.
It sure does.
Absolutely stay committed and to the work. It's a long haul. It's not these are not quick fixes. It's like building a relationship with anyone. If you don't really have a relationship with an individual or a whole community or whatever it might be, that's not usually as quick as saying, we want to do it. And then you make a flyer and you put it up and then you say, okay, the work is done. We're building a relationship. No, these types of things take time, and staying committed to that are important. And a part of that staying committed to it is remaining open to all of the infinite number of cultural differences that exist. Everything from eye contact to the way people shake hands and greet one another, to the norms of whether food's included in a meeting or not, to like all of those things and so many more are opportunities to learn, but there are also places where sometimes people's feelings, sometimes people's understandings of how serious someone was or how committed someone was, we're all translating those things from our own lived experiences to what somebody else who we're sitting down with or what somebody on the other side of the screen is presenting us with. And so I really strongly recommend to remain open to the vast possibilities of all of the cultural differences that we have and embrace that. And through that, accept the challenges that we come across, because there will be challenges. It's not as easy as doing the Google searches that I recommended and reaching out to people. You'll get unanswered phone calls. You'll get unanswered emails. People will respond with, why do you want to know that? You know, anything it could be. And so accept those challenges out of a commitment to build stronger relationships and serve more of the community.
Thanks. So
yeah,
if you want to kind of close us out however you would like to, Naawakwe.
Yeah, I don't really want to talk about all these. Most of these are some general recommendations that I sort of give any organization or any group working on these types of endeavors. I list them here for people who get the PowerPoint to, you know, print off and put up in a poster in their office and say, oh yeah, this is what these are the recommendations. These are the things that I if I do these things, it will help me along the way to do some of these things. But I do stand by the items listed here. And of course, there are many other things that any number of individuals can do. But these are some things that I have found important in my life. These are things that I have found important and meaningful when people like Sarah have come to me. And when I can see this in that person's intentions and in their efforts, it helps build a relationship and it helps engage a broader community and a broader group of people. So I list them here for people to look at, to consider for themselves, and to figure out for themselves, how can I do that? How can I do that for myself, my local organization? What role do I have to play in the organization to do this? And so I list those there as a pathway for folks to try. And that says, Mi'il Minik. And that's the translation that says, that's it. It's sort of like how we end any kind of talk or presentation. We say, Mi'il Minik, that's the amount of it. That is what I can share. I appreciate everyone who's logged on, and I appreciate the time that everyone has spent here with us. And I'm humbled to be asked to do this work. So, Mi'il Minik.
Everybody wouldn't mind going to do your reactions and giving Naawakwe a great round of applause. We really appreciate his time, expertise, background, everything that he's able to share with us to make us a better organization that's more capable of strengthening our communities. So thank you, Naawakwe.
Thank you all as well.